There is a phone call that was never made. On February 28, 2026, the United States and Israel launched the most significant military operation in the Middle East in a generation. Strikes on Iranian nuclear facilities, strikes on Iranian military infrastructure. The opening of a conflict that everyone in the region understood would produce immediate and severe retaliation across the entire Gulf. Saudi Arabia, America's most important Arab ally, the country hosting American military bases, the country whose oil infrastructure sits directly in Iran's retaliatory crosshairs, the country whose entire economic future depends on regional stability, found out about it the same way everyone else did, from the news. Nobody called, nobody briefed, nobody asked whether Riyadh was ready for the consequences of a decision that would land, literally and physically, on Saudi soil within hours. Within hours of the strikes, locations across Saudi Arabia were subject to multiple retaliatory Iranian missile attacks. Missiles targeted Prince Sultan Air Base and Riyadh Airport. The Ras Tanura oil refinery, the largest in Saudi Arabia, was struck by Iranian drones, causing fires that forced its closure. The United States Embassy in Riyadh was hit. American soldiers died on Saudi territory. Saudi Arabia was absorbing the cost of a war it had not been asked about, had not endorsed, and had been actively trying to prevent through years of careful, expensive diplomacy. And somewhere in the royal court in Riyadh, a conclusion that had been building for years became permanent. The American era in the Gulf is over, and Saudi Arabia is not waiting around to be collateral damage when the next decision gets made without them. What is happening right now between Saudi Arabia and the United States is not a diplomatic spat. It is not a temporary misunderstanding between allies. It is the controlled, deliberate, systematic dismantling of the most consequential bilateral relationship in modern geopolitics. And it is happening in plain sight, while Washington either cannot see it or refuses to. To understand the full scale of what is unfolding, you need to go back to the moment that broke the relationship's foundational logic. September 14, 2019, a swarm of Iranian drones and cruise missiles struck Abqaiq, the processing facility that handled roughly 70% of Saudi Arabia's entire oil output. In less than 20 minutes, half of Saudi Arabia's oil production was offline. 5% of the global oil supply disappeared in a plume of black smoke over the eastern desert. Saudi Arabia had spent hundreds of billions on American weapons systems, Patriot missile batteries, advanced radar installations, the full, expensive apparatus of the world's most lavishly funded bilateral security relationship. And none of it had stopped a single drone. MBS looked to Washington, and Trump did nothing. No military strike on Iran, no serious escalation, some additional sanctions, strongly worded statements, a quiet signal from the White House that America had no appetite for going to war over Saudi oil infrastructure. Riyadh only agreed to dialogue with Tehran after Trump refused to go to war against Iran in retaliation for Tehran's role in the drone attack against Saudi oil fields in 2019. That refusal was not just a policy disappointment, it was a civilizational signal, the security guarantee that Saudi Arabia had built its entire strategic architecture around, the assumption that sat underneath every arms deal, every military basing agreement, every diplomatic alignment was conditional, transactional, and ultimately insufficient when tested by actual Iranian aggression. If America would not respond to a direct attack on the most strategically critical oil facility on Earth, what was the guarantee actually worth? MBS's answer, arrived at methodically over the years that followed, was not enough to build everything on. What followed was a masterclass in strategic repositioning that Washington consistently misread as minor course correction. In March 2023, Saudi Arabia did something that would have been genuinely unimaginable 5 years earlier. China mediated an agreement between Iran and Saudi Arabia to normalize diplomatic relations. That Beijing brokered the détente sent geopolitical shockwaves around the world. The agreement marks Beijing's most substantial and successful diplomatic engagement in the region to date, and undercuts American influence in the Middle East. Saudi Arabia, America's indispensable Gulf partner for half a century, normalized relations with Iran, its primary regional adversary, the country responsible for the 2019 Abqaiq attack, the country whose proxies had been firing missiles at Saudi territory for years. And it did not ask Washington to broker the deal. It called Beijing. The deal represents Beijing's first foray into Middle East mediation, an area that for the past few decades was largely occupied by Washington. China stepped into a diplomatic space America had assumed was exclusively its own, produced an agreement that decades of American pressure, sanctions, and military posturing had never achieved, and collected the diplomatic credit in front of the entire world. Saudi Arabia's willingness to give President Xi a significant diplomatic victory in the Gulf reflects the strains between the United States and Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, and his resentment of continuing U.S. pressure. This was not a one-off, it was a pattern. Then came the petrodollar, the financial architecture that has underpinned American global dominance since Richard Nixon and King Faisal struck their original deal in 1974. Saudi Arabia prices oil in dollars. The entire world needs dollars to buy oil. That creates permanent global demand for American currency, allowing Washington to run deficits that would cripple any other government on Earth. The petrodollar is not merely a financial arrangement. It is the mechanism by which the American economy sits at the center of the global system, regardless of what else is happening. In June 2024, Saudi Arabia quietly let the petrodollar agreement expire. No announcement, no ceremony, no press conference. Just the quiet, deliberate expiration of the agreement that has structured global finance for 50 years. Gulf countries have been quietly diversifying their trade partners for years, trading oil outside the US dollar, and therefore definitionally destroying the principle of the petrodollar as the exclusive currency for trading oil. The dollar's share of global foreign exchange reserves has reached a 25-year low, falling from 71% in 1999 to roughly 57% today. Signs point to China being the big winner of the de-dollarization push. Every barrel of Saudi oil sold to China in yuan is a barrel that does not generate demand for American currency. Every barrel that does not generate dollar demand is a brick removed from the foundation of American financial dominance. This is not abstract economics. This is the most consequential financial realignment since Bretton Woods, and Riyadh is driving it. Now back to 2026. Because the Iran war has not just complicated Saudi Arabia's strategic position, it has blown it up. The conflict has unraveled the basic premise on which Saudi foreign policy has rested for the past 5 years. Since 2021, Saudi regional posture has been organized around a logic of de-escalation in service of economic transformation. Riyadh froze its expeditionary campaign in Yemen, signed a Chinese-brokered détente with Iran in 2023, and built a vast diplomatic edifice premised on the assumption that the Gulf could be insulated from the wars consuming the Levant. That 5-year project of careful, painstaking diplomatic construction was destroyed in a single night. February 28, 2026. No consultation, no coordination, no warning. The closure of the Strait of Hormuz has revealed a key vulnerability not only for trade, but also for the success of Saudi Arabia's Vision 2030 strategy. Now that Hormuz has been closed once, there will always be the risk that it could happen again. This poses a long-term threat to Saudi Arabia's trade flows and economic transformation plans. Repeated or prolonged disruption would weigh on revenues, investor confidence, and the kingdom's ability to present itself as a stable hub for trade, logistics, and finance. MBS wanted diplomacy. Washington chose bombs. Saudi Arabia is still paying the bill. The fractures are now visible everywhere, and nowhere more dramatically than in OPEC itself. For decades, OPEC was the institutional expression of Gulf Arab solidarity. Saudi Arabia was its undisputed leader, managing production quotas, setting the global oil price floor, and using the cartel as a tool of coordinated economic power. Whatever else was happening in the region, the Gulf states hung together inside OPEC. That is now over. The United Arab Emirates announced it would exit OPEC, effective May 1, 2026, in what could be a blow to control over prices by the group long led in practice by Saudi Arabia. The UAE's exit is not simply about production quotas. It is a symptom of a fracture between Riyadh and Abu Dhabi that has been building for years, and that the Iran war has dramatically accelerated. The Saudi-Emirati fracture crossed a qualitative threshold in late 2025 when Saudi Arabian airstrikes targeted an Emirati weapons convoy in Yemen, an act without precedent between two nominal allies. Two countries that Washington has always treated as a unified Gulf bloc, reliable American partners, coordinated on security and energy, were conducting military strikes against each other's assets by late 2025, while simultaneously simultaneously being presented to the American public as the foundation of a stable Gulf alliance. Although Saudi Arabia will still be the dominant player in OPEC, it will be the only major producer with significant spare capacity and may be forced to cut its production and exports in the future to compensate for increases by the UAE. Their competition for influence in the Red Sea is set to sharpen. Saudi Arabia is now fighting on multiple fronts simultaneously, absorbing Iranian missiles it didn't ask for, watching its most important Gulf partner exit the institution it spent decades building, managing a Vision 2030 that is hemorrhaging investor confidence, and maintaining a relationship with Washington that provides weapons and diplomatic cover while consistently ignoring what Riyadh actually needs, which is stability, not escalation. The surface of the relationship still looks functional. In November 2025, Trump elevated Saudi Arabia to major non-NATO ally status. Arms deals worth billions continue. MBS visits the White House. The diplomatic language stays warm. That warmth is the performance. What is actually happening underneath it is something else entirely. Saudi Arabia has been moving toward a significant realignment of its national security strategy and foreign policy. It involves a total rethinking of its relationship with the United States. What MBS has built is not a rupture. It is an architecture of independence. Defense pacts with Pakistan signed in September 2025. Energy agreements with China deepening. Oil increasingly traded in yuan. Iran normalized through Beijing. The petrodollar quietly expired. OPEC fracturing. And through all of it, just enough warmth with Washington to keep the advanced weapons flowing, without conceding the exclusivity that America has always assumed the relationship contained. While a sense of optimism followed Mohammed bin Salman's visit to Washington in November 2025, certain incompatibilities between American and Saudi objectives persist. The kingdom has long relied on the United States for security, yet in recent years, Washington has repeatedly disappointed Riyadh on this front. Repeatedly. That is the word that matters. Not once, not a misunderstanding, repeatedly. The deal made in 1974 was elegant in its simplicity. American protection, Saudi oil, dollars recycled back into American treasury bonds, both sides getting what they needed from an arrangement neither could easily walk away from. That deal is gone, dismantled piece by piece. The petrodollar expired. The Iran détente brokered in Beijing. OPEC fracturing from within. American bombs landing Iran's retaliation on Saudi soil without a phone call preceding them. Washington can keep calling it a partnership. MBS will keep attending the state dinners. The weapons will keep flowing. The diplomatic language will stay warm. But the 50-year arrangement that structured the Middle East and underpinned American global financial dominance has been quietly, deliberately, and irreversibly walked away from. The betrayal is not coming. It is already done. And the only question now is how long Washington takes to admit what Riyadh decided years ago. The answer, based on recent evidence, appears to be a very long time.